Welcome to Working with Identities, the podcast where meaningful conversations between individuals and companies come to life. Join us as we explore the dynamic relationship between personal identities and companies. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of Working with Identities. This is your host, Mahmoud Asi. I'm a diversity consultant. I'm very happy today to bring on this conversation with two amazing guests, where we're going to be talking about being a person of color in the workplace. I have here two amazing people that I'm going to pass on the microphone for them to present themselves, and I'm going to start with Karessa. Hi, Karissa. Thank you for being here today.
Hello, Mahmoud and Don. How are you? Hello to the listeners. My name is Karessa Malaya. I'm a social media manager and also a writer and photographer. I'm based in Madrid, currently residing in Móstoles, and I am a mother, a single mother of an 8-year-old boy, and I love reading. I love my plants, and I am currently reading Metamorphosis of Kafka.
Oh, nice read. Nice read. Thank you very much for being here, Karissa. And we have also Dawn. Hi, Dawn. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here, Momod, and nice also to be with you, Karessa, as well. Hi everyone. So my name is Don. I use the pronouns he, him. I am global D&I manager for an organization called Henkel. It's a German organization. I am based in Amsterdam. I don't have any kids, but I have two fur kids. I have a cat and a dog. And originally I'm from India, and yes, and also I am also a yoga teacher. So that is something which I do outside my office job, and I'm also passionate about animals, and also D&I is something which I'm doing full time. So I'm very passionate about this topic and happy to be here.
Thank you very much for being here today. I'm very excited for today's conversation. So let's jump right into it, actually. So, as the title entails, we're going to be talking about the experience of people of color in the workplace. But I think the first thing for us to do here in this conversation is to discuss what does it mean when you say a person of color. What do you think?
Do you have a manual with some sort of definition in your department, Don? I'm really very curious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's quite a complex one, right? So people of color is a very broad terminology. I think it depends on the which region you go, that become much more relevant in that region. Generally, when we talk about people of color, it's non-white, someone who is non-white, someone who is not European, ancestry origin. That is a broad term we normally use for people of color.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
How do you
always
understand?
relative
Mm,
to
yeah.
the normative, to the standard, right?
Exactly, because in India, like if I'm talking, if because I'm from India, so we don't really have people of color, but then you have skin tones that plays role when it comes to the workplaces, when it comes to the social media, when it comes to the how the representation is happening in the Bollywood, which is the movies. There's like the skin tone is placing much more bigger role. But when it comes to Europe, which is where I'm based, when you talk about people of color, whoever which is non-white will be under umbrella of people of color. I would say that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same where I came from. I'm from the Philippines. So when you talk about people of color, you also refer to non-whites, but we also have the skin tones. So the people that you usually see on the media or, well, yeah, the beauty standard would always be lighter than the standard, more common brownish, dark brown skin tone. And there would be, yeah, like a more, at least when I was younger, as a girl, there would be a more direct discrimination against people with darker skin tones. Like you would be just called right out ugly,
Yeah.
right out excluded from certain social circles. So that changed, of course, here in Europe. Like the discrimination based on skin tone is a bit more covert, but
Yeah.
it's like it's included in the code when they see you and when they read you, they have that coding.
Yeah, and I think for me also, like growing up in India as well, if you have a dark skin, we even have like what do you call that, advertisement for fair skin. So they said if you get fair skin, put this cream, then you will get a job. Basically, you are eligible to even apply for a job if you put some like all these creams make your skin lighter. If you're darker skin, you are not eligible for this job. Just by the looks, you can get the job. So it's like it was engraved like how the skin tone plays a big role even into get into this good job, so kind of like related to what we are facing at the moment. So I guess it depends on which countries and which region you are. The people of color, it's basically like it can be like it's really depends on the melanin in your skin, right? So how the melanin content in your skin is impacting your social experiences and your career basically. It's for me, it's now when I think about it, it's crazy that we looked at this advertisement and at that point I thought, yeah, we should be doing this. And I was also putting so much of cream so that I will be also employable. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. It's like there would be the before and after
Yeah.
commercials where, before you're like
Yeah.
dark skinned, you have messy hair,
Unhappy.
you're alone, you're unhappy, nobody looks at you, even,
Mm,
birds and cats and dogs stay away from you. And then,
mm,
oh, use this. They have this like sort of package complete with soap,
mm,
facial cleanser, lotion,
mm.
body lotion and facial lotion. And then, like, after a month of use, oh, you have, like brighter complexion, you're fairer, and people start approaching you,
And
and
you're
you might
happy.
even get
And you're
married.
happy. And you're happy and you're a millionaire, you have a good job. Yeah, everyone wants to be a friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like it's connected to your notion of success,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
While growing up, there were very, very few references in the arts, in the culture, in professionally as well, even in sciences and academics that are brown skinned. So
Yeah. It resonates a lot what you're saying because I remember such also commercials happening in Egypt and how I would see them and the kind of the same thing, like how just using this cream changes your life completely and stuff like that. So it really, I think it's a common past trauma, if I might say, in that sense. Yeah. Well, I think like one of the things I want to elaborate as well here is interesting because like there is a new like I don't know, like I would say more or less given more or less recent debate with the term, or maybe not so recent, with the term person of color,
yes,
where because the term person of color is basically, as you mentioned at the beginning, is a term that is in comparison to white individuals, right? So it's like everybody that is not white in that sense, right? How do you feel about this terminology? Do you feel like this is the best way that that we identify, like people? Do you think it's important first place to group all other peoples that are not white? Maybe that action as well is important specifically in contexts where we want to tackle discrimination in that sense. So, what is your opinion about the term as well?
I mean, maybe I can start. I mean, my personal opinion, I think sometimes we got so stuck by the names. I think we need to think about broader perspective of what is behind what we are trying to achieve. And I think person of color is kind of like you just created terminology to classify the struggles faced by people who have melanated skin. So specifically, I'm looking at from Asian perspective as well. If you are lighter skin, you are much more successful. You are much more uh, able to get good jobs than you are darker skin. So I guess the main point for me is that addressing the issue. Rather than going into should we find a different terminology for this or not. So I think that is where I stand behind, because when you talk about person of color, it talks a lot to me specifically about the challenges faced by a person who has higher melanated content in their skin. So if you're darker skin, you do have much more struggle compared to someone who is lighter skin that can also have Indians who are melanated, and even in African diaspora, if you look at it, even in the African diaspora, so the challenges faced by someone who is light skin and then someone who is highly darker pigmented skin is completely different. So I would say in that direction, for me, the name itself brings a lot of notions regarding the challenges faced by people who are melanated skin.
Yes, I agree. There's something deeper in that, in the terminology, right? And I also struggle with it because I came here in Spain when I was 17 years old, so I was just about to enter college. And it was weird because I spent, before coming here, I spent 17 years considering myself substandard because of my skin color. Like among the cousins, I'd be the fat black one, like just the outcast. And when I came here, people would be like envious of my skin color. And then I noticed how men and women would literally burn themselves under the sun just to get browner, and they would do the reverse that was advised to do in the Philippines to make ourselves whiter. They would make themselves browner by putting coconut oil, I don't know, coke, you know, all those kinds of, harmful substances in their skin. So it's like, is it really about color, or is it about who wears the color?
Hmm.
Because I have seen very, very toasted, very, very burnt,
Mm,
formerly white European people who use that skin tone as a status quo. Like, oh, they have money to go to the beach on summer. But when it's on us, oh, poor people, poor tourists, or, migrant invasion. I struggle a lot with that. So, um, on
Yeah.
that, in that light, also there's I don't know if it's still used in other countries. Dawn, I don't know if in
mm,
Amsterdam, flesh color, skin color. When you describe um, color for, yeah, that's like skin tone. For
mm,
women, it's always with the stockings in winter,
mm,
right? So, but yeah, give me a pair of flesh colored stockings. Is like flesh. What do you mean flesh colored? So it's like, yeah, I struggle a lot with that. And I try to teach my son as well, because he'd be like, please pass me the flesh colored pen. What do you mean flesh colored? So it's yeah, I haven't found the solution to it yet. I'm still on the journey.
yeah,
Yeah. I do I mean I do see the importance definitely of understanding the, that going beyond the words, right? Like the when we focus so much on the words, we do not give enough energy to the things that do matter, right? And you both highlighted something that is very important, is that whilst we're using a term that groups a huge number of individuals within that term, we need to understand that the realities of such individuals is different even within that, in that sense, right? So it does not mean that every single person of color would have the same experience. Also,
Exactly.
what you highlighted, Carissa, is very important, because there are people of color that are white passing,
yeah,
like that they belong to an ethnic group that would be, like, you would categorize this ethnic group as people of color, but maybe they themselves do not they have lighter skin, right? Or they might look white, so they would pass for a white person in that sense, right? And the experience of that individual is usually different than a person that is visibly a person of color, right?
yeah,
So I think like all of this is very important. I think like we can also like dive deeper into this, like how, also like people from Latin America, for example, that might be that might identify as white in Latin America would experience a different status in, if they come to Europe or if they go to the United States, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's important as well to realize that when we're talking about these social categories, they're always about the contact between different individuals within a system, right? And how that produces different experiences. So, speaking of these experiences, I would like to actually ask you the following question, which is, why is it important to discuss and address challenges faced by people of color in the workplace, for example? Why is it important for us to have a conversation like this conversation?
Yeah. I can start, and Karissa, you can jump
No, no,
later.
no. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead. I'm very
Right.
interested in
So,
learning about your experience in this.
I think the reason because is that we all have brains, right? So as long as human beings have brains, we are biased. And this right. So every time, that is the one mechanism our brain is always doing. We are always making shortcuts. One thing which was very striking still to me is that whenever you think about kindergarten teacher, you immediately think about a female. I immediately think about females still when I heard the name kindergarten teacher. So it's in a way that our brains are so wired to make quick decisions, and that also implicitly what has happened within the workplace is that we look at specific roles that has been gender specific, and that's also be racial specific. For example, I'm Indian, so people normally assume that I'm in IT, and I am the worst person to be in IT. I have no clue about anything to do with IT. If somebody tell me, I remember one of my colleagues tell me that, hey, my computer is not working. It looks like you can be a person who can help me. And I'm like, did you try to press the restart button? He pressed the restart button, it worked, but I'm like, the point of like, I am not the IT person. So because of that, I think that was a quite a funny one, but that also impact the way we are hiring people within the organization. So, and people of color has also always been not been seen at the and not been visible at the top management level. If you look at the big multinational organization, now it's changing, but when you look at historically, the top C level, there is no lack of representation, and then it doesn't. It's normally it's not really happening that you're consciously not discriminating. It's just implicitly, unconsciously we are making decisions, and these people are not going through the pipeline. And various studies also has been conducted in UK as well. So the same resume, you put a white sounding name, and or for example an Asian name or South Asian name sounding name. So the Asian and South Asian sounding names has to apply for 5 or 6 times more. The resume was exactly the same to even to just get into interview. So this is exactly the reason why we need to have the conversation. So when we have the conversation, you make people aware of, okay, I am actually biased. You started to have the conversation, and when people are much more aware, then people are much more conscious whenever they're doing the decisions. Because many of us are not implicitly, like, we are not actually discriminating people. It's just our brain. You look at someone, you already put them into the box, and you think that, okay, this person is not suitable for this job. And this is why I think it's really important to have that open conversation. It's not about blaming others, you behaving this. It's about having the conversation, making people much more aware. And I think that's exactly why we should have conversation. Once you have the conversation, then I think people will start to think and start to make changes. Mm,
I agree with that. I think
mm,
it's necessary to put it on the table
mm,
because people, I mean, at this
mm.
age and time, there are more people who would be discriminating unintentionally than intentionally, or at least that has been my experience, and I would like to keep my faith in that. And I think when we operate off the autopilot, we can we can be more aware of how we create safe spaces for everybody to just feel they can go beyond surviving in that space, that they can also bloom and they can also develop. And this would sound like so CSR, but I really believe in synergies. In my experience, my skin color has always been code for, oh, she can't know that much, or in whatever level, may it be language wise, um anything technical on my work in social media, or when I was a practicing economist. And people would just maybe be, I don't know, they'd feel cheated out of their own biases, because I mean, I'm not a genius, but of course I studied my expertise. I'm a naturally curious person. I love languages, and then they'd just be shocked that I could speak Spanish and French aside from English and Tagalog, and I would know things on economics. It's like, well, that's what I studied. It's my college degree. But as Don said, they would just pigeonhole you in the case of Filipinos, in care and services, which it's not bad. There's nothing bad with it, and I'm proud of that. But almost all of my family, are nurses and engineers. But I think we should help also other people to open up their minds. I think we'd gain more. I don't know, at least we'd have more fun because you just get the awkwardness out of the room as soon as possible, and then we can start relating with each other, connecting with each other on even terms.
I really like what you said, because like I think like my vision of this stems from the idea that we design a lot of processes and systems with a certain person in mind, right? Like we create the hiring process, for example, with a specific person in mind.
Yeah.
And then when we talk with, like, when we meet another person that is not that person that we had in mind, or like less connected or less similar to that ideal person that we had in mind, we create these obstacles for that person, without sometimes with us noticing, and sometimes without us noticing. I think the challenge is for different minority groups, in this case ethno minority groups, is that we're constantly trying to adapt to a system that was not created with us in mind. So I
Yeah.
think that the work here, and like the importance here is, of such conversation as you were mentioning, is like highlighting why and how the system, makes it difficult for people to enter different processes and systems and whatnot, and the importance of us redesigning this
Yeah.
structure in order to ensure that we truly are creating, inclusion in where we are. So since we're starting to dive deeper into these challenges, and you highlighted a lot the impact of bias and stereotyping, and how we put people into categories, like, okay, you're from this group, I see you as this, as opposed to opening up our minds into the merit of possibilities that people have. I would love to for us to dive deeper into understanding more of the challenges that you think people of color face in the workplace, and how do these challenges impact people, both from a professional point of view but also from a mental well-being perspective.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Karissa?
Go ahead, Don. That's
Okay,
my
I
son.
think, I think, I think one of the main challenge I think I personally face as well is microaggressions, right? So it's not something which is so big, but it just starts to accumulate. It's just build up and build up and build up, and it just frustrates you. And the microaggression, something which is not happening. It's happening everywhere, right? So I live in Amsterdam, so something similar. I always experience that if you go to a shop or a restaurant. So if I'm with my white friends, um, so the way they treat them is differently than the way they take my orders. It's like I remember they were very friendly, and then suddenly they look at me. Yes, what do you want? So one of my friend actually did pick it up, and they said, hey, that's he's being quite hostile to Don. So I'm like, I'm so used to it at one point, but then how is being translated into workplace is that you have, so if you are a person of color, I'm not saying everywhere, but you do have people will be more scrutinizing your ideas. So the same idea, if has been said by someone else, they will be immediately buying the idea, and then you will be more scrutinized. And there is also the opposite of microaggression, is called microaffirmation. So someone will be given more credits for the ideas, and then you, as a person of color, you give the idea, they will like, okay, we'll take it, but the credits being given to someone. So when these microaggressions are building up, it is it is stressful. I think it is really impacting your mental health and your motivation to go to work. And that's why many people of color will leave the organization and go for somewhere else, which they feel like they are represented. So they look at the organization. So many of us look at the organization and look at the senior leaders and senior management, say, hey, will I be ever be able to be there? Because there is lack of representation. So that is one of the struggle for people of color, is that you are not represented. Then you feel like, okay, if I work for this organization, will I ever be able to they be there? So that's why many of the organizations are now trying to build the pipeline, and many organizations want to make a change when the C-suite is already there. So now they're building the pipeline to make the changes. So I think that's one of the thing uh, which people of color struggle with, is, I think, start with this microaggressions, and this yeah, that's what I would say, one of the things uh, which is still in workplaces.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that
Yeah.
because when I said before that in the workplace and as an adult, when I show up in a professional space, my skin tone would be code for, yeah, she couldn't know that much. So when Don said that you'd be more scrutinized if you say an idea, that has happened to me in translations. From Spanish to English, I would be fighting for the use of certain terms, and they'd look at me like, why you're not you're not an native English speaker. Little do they know that in the Philippines, English is basically, it's like in India. It's your
Yes.
mother tongue as well.
Yeah.
And the same idea would be proposed by another person only with lighter skin, and they would just believe it right away and they would approve it, and it wouldn't have to go through a lot of scrutiny or a lot of research on how to use this term, what context, how can we pronounce it, are you sure it's pronounced that way, and it's exhausting. In the workplace it translates to a waste of time, lack of efficiency, and it's like you're making me waste my energy over something that is so basic when I could be contributing better, and I don't know, just move forward and just get it over with. But it's hard because they have that bias, and unless you really discuss it openly without gaslighting anyone, without putting the blame on anyone, but just having a transparent and, yeah, safe conversation about the matter, I think it would keep on operating in that in the shadows, behind the curtains, and we won't be able to really get ahead with that, because unless you face it, you won't know what is it, you know
Yeah, I agree to Carissa 100%. Like, if you don't have not really experienced it, but then I have to actually one time have to point out that, hey, this is the same idea I said, but no one agreed to it. But then someone else had the same idea, everyone agreed to it. And I think, yeah, 100%, Carissa. And then one of the challenge I think is also faced by people of color is also the networking, right? So within the organization, as you all know, we know that organizations works by networking. So if you want to go promotions, you need to have that network. So one of the thing which human beings have is affinity biases, right? So you are more friendly with someone who looks like you, someone who talks like you, like someone who can joke with you, like, so it's affinity biases. So it's people of color, because you are coming from different race, a different background, so your relation to them is quite different when it comes to workplace. So something which can be quite natural for the majority. So here we talk about majority and minorities. So minorities find it really difficult because then you don't have the networking support to even progress in the organization. This is why also need to, like, sponsorship. We talk about sponsorship for minorities, people of color, because it happens so natural for the majority. The minority struggles with it, and then sponsorship and mentoring is one of the main thing for is needed for people to progress in the organizations, because then only you will know that job is coming. So hey, you someone will recommend you, because that's for this Senior managers will most of the time will be talking about how I have this colleague, so you need to be recommended. So only the recommendation will happen, which needs to happen by networking. When you cannot be in the part of networking, then you will no matter how good you are, unfortunately, you will not, your name will not be said. So that is one of the barriers also faced by people of color.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. And
Mm.
now that you mentioned networking, I was I thought of an incident that happened quite a long time ago, because people in Spain, they're very well defensive when we talk about racism, discrimination. They would be like, "What? We are not racists. We don't discriminate by color," replied a young white person, or an
Mm.
old white person. It's like, how can you say there's no discrimination, per color when you are white? It's difficult. So there are instances when a space, may it be in the workspace or in arts and culture and activism movements as well, when um, you voice out your concern, or you voice out an experience, when you've experienced aggression, micro macro aggression, and they would just easily tag you as, "Oh, you're being so sensitive." I don't know if you've encountered that kind of, you've been in that kind of situation, and then it just sort of backfires on you, because you thought it would be a safe space, but then you'd be gaslighted into being hypersensitive. And so who do you talk to? And besides, it's like, we really need to address it, because hypersensitivity or not, a person has felt,
Yeah,
aggrieved.
so
So
I guess it is quite if someone is telling you that if you felt something and you voice it up, but someone say I don't think it's racism, so you really think, oh, it might be me. Then it happens again and again. Then you stop talking about it. So I have seen that I have stopped talking about multiple situations because for me it becomes so normal. Then I
exactly,
started to brush it up, like you know what, it's brush it up. But then you need to talk about it. Then only it will solve. But many of us, because you have so much things to do it, so one of my friends say, why do you want to talk about it? Just brush it out and move on. So because but then it can happen that it's in my head, like it will impact me, so just building on it makes me more anxious. And also, like at the end, there are so many people of color who are going on burnout is mainly because they're frustrated, they are not voicing it up, so it's just building and building up. And you might see one day one colleague is exploding, and then you like, why that happened? And this doesn't happen because of one incident, it's because happened because of a
it's a
series of
build-up.
incident build up, it just reached the top, and
Exactly.
you like one thing and just burst everything. So that is the impact which will happen eventually.
That
Yeah.
is very harmful to the nervous system. In fact,
Yeah.
this has been, discrimination and racism has been topic in my therapy sessions for, since forever. I mean, not since forever, but since my adult life, and it really is a factor, and it really harms you.
Mm.
And you could have afterwards, like physical symptoms of that.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. And I really love that you focus a lot on microaggressions, because I think like also what you mentioned, Carissa, was very, very important, is that the idea of it's the visibility of the microaggressions themselves, right? I think again, like when you, I think we sometimes forget that privilege also limits you from noticing things that are happening in a certain environment, because you're flowing in the environment, you're not facing difficulties in the
Exactly.
environment. So that you hear your colleagues saying, "Oh, I'm facing this and that," you're like, "What? No, the environment is amazing."
It's all
Yeah.
sunshine and rainbows. What are you talking about? What planet do you live in?
So I think it puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of listening to people, and I think like I think you put a very interesting point. I mentioned it as well earlier, that like big instances that everybody is going to be against, like these macro aggressions that we can
Mm.
view. I think like I think the reaction to those would be bigger, or I believe that the reaction to those would be bigger. But microaggressions, because of their nature of the micro, people would like tell you, oh no, you're being very sensitive, right?
Yeah.
Because they're a small thing. But we need to understand that it is, as you mentioned, Don, it's the accumulation of these small things. We need to understand that we need to treat them with great importance if we want to truly create inclusive environments, not to dismiss things. Actually, there was a study by INAR, the European Network Against Racism. They did a publication, and they were showing in one of those publications, I don't remember the exact title, but like they were showing that how like they drew this route of how a woman of color, for example, would enter the organization, receive microaggressions, report those microaggressions, being then be told that she's being sensitive, or say, oh, it's miscommunication or
Mm.
misunderstanding or stuff like that. And then it would accumulate and would end up in people leaving the organization. So we need to understand as well, like, if you want to truly make an inclusive environment and a diverse environment, we want people to stay in the organization. We need to respond to these situations. We cannot just reduce them to, oh, people are being so sensitive in that sense, right? So
Yeah.
I think, like, based on this, what we're talking about, I would love to touch on like two things here, which is the first thing is kind of is how what else can we do other than responding to these microaggressions and like not letting them pass? What else can we do? Can organizations do in order to truly create inclusive spaces for people of color? And I just want to connect this with something that Donny were mentioning earlier, and I want to give the also space to build up on, which is the point of representation in different spaces, right? So how can we ensure that as well?
I can start. I think one of the main thing is by creating education awareness, right? So, like I said, most of the time it's unconscious biases. People are doing all these things because their lack of awareness what is happening. I think first and foremost thing all the organizations can do is already having this trainings, making people aware of unconscious biases and make them aware of the cultural differences. And it's okay if we are different. That's a fact. We are culturally different. We might talk different, but that doesn't impact our performance. That doesn't impact that who I'm an Indian, I can be a doctor, I can be an engineer, I can be a psychologist as well. So that doesn't impact my performance or who I can be. I think creating that awareness is definitely the first thing. And the second thing I would say is allyship within the organizations. I think it's speaking up when you see microaggressions and discrimination is happening against the people of colors. I think people who are facing this microaggression at one point will stop talking because you are tired of talking about it. So I think really creating that allyship is always a verb. So it doesn't mean that, oh, you can just sit there and say that, okay, I'm an ally. It should be actionable, meaning that you're speaking against if you see this microaggression happening. And then the representation can be only be achieved by hiring processes. So you look at your teams, look at your organizations, and also implement the policies to ensure that diverse candidates at least come through the pipeline. So if you look at your interns, who are you hiring the interns? Which universities are you hiring? And if you really want to create an equitable, you also need to look for the universities which are not top-notch universities, because many of the underrepresented minorities have no chance to go to this top universities. So sometimes we put ourselves that we want to get people from this top universities, so they are kind of like privileged. So you need to go to this university, you need to have privilege, you need to have the connection sometimes. So then many people who do not have the connection, do not have the privilege, will not be able to go there. So you're really looking at your hiring practices. Who are you hiring? How can you make it equitable? So I think that's one of the thing. And then of course this mentoring and sponsorship programs for underrepresented minorities, that is something which we are also trying to do within the organizations as well, because which is quite natural for someone majority have that mentoring and sponsorship and leadership, and the top leaders take accountable for that as well. So you start to sponsor someone who normally do not sponsor. And at the end of the day, I think it's also organization needs to be accountable. So setting measurable targets. look at your organizations, and then this is something which we can measure. So look at the organization, what is the representation of what is happening in your country. For example, this is the representation is happening. For example, I'm just saying in Amsterdam is a pot of, so you have multiple races and like nationalities in Amsterdam. So if you look at the organization, well, why are these people are not in my organization? And this is something which you can be easily measured. And I think when you do, and also the leadership take accountable, so they are accountable, so the top management needs to be accountable for these KPIs, then I think we can really make structural fundamental changes, because you cannot just say, you need to show actions need to be followed to make it more equitable workplaces, I would say.
Don, I'm very interested with what
Mm,
you just said right now.
mm,
So before I share my ideas as an
mm,
employee and also as a uh, professional in the communication sector, I'm very curious as
mm,
to what KPIs you
mm.
use, because I suppose they are not just quantitative KPIs. You also
Yeah,
use qualitative KPIs.
yeah.
And what KPIs are you using right
So,
now, and how are you faring?
so,
If it's
so
okay to share.
Yeah, I mean, I can share the top level. I can't go much into the details because quite
Okay,
confidential.
of
So
course.
we do measure on really on internationality. So we have internationality index. We measure on representation in different business unit. So we see have certain business units, they have higher representation of people also from emerging markets. So we look at emerging market and mature markets. Here we are really looking at only at emerging market, mature market. So we measure and track, and we also look at certain divisions, certain departments, and we ask them, hey, what is happening here? Why there is only why there is a majority of is certain group, and why there is a lack of representation. So this is how you can act. This is something which every organization can track and measure, and then something which you can always do. But I think there is, of course, depends on the regions and the countries. You have GDPR plays into role, so it's quite strict, GDPR. So we need to make sure that the race is not being collected. So something which we can always do within the organization is to do the surveys, anonymous surveys, and then you can really get also this feelings of what does people of color feel within the organization. We are still struggling to find a way to collect the data, but this is something which we also wanted to do. Then you can really get the idea of, like, no matter whatever things you're doing, you need to get the feedback from your employees. How do they feel within the organization, and then what can we do better? I think they have to give you the feedback, so then you can create actions for them. So you can do a surveys, you can do a global surveys to do that. Then so but then you can measure the movement of the employees, and also you can measure also by how many people are hiring. So this is something which you can easily measure, because you know the number of people you're hiring, and look at the numbers and see how many people were interviewed, how many people were shortlisted, how many got hired. So these are the things which you can easily do, and then you can see, hey, there is any issues happening there, and then you address that issues. These are some of the things as an organizations you can structurally do to track, I would say.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's very interesting because I was thinking, like, if you only use quantitative KPIs, you run the risk of responding to that KPI with tokenism.
mm,
So yeah, I was just going through it in my head, because as I was thinking of the response to this question, I realized that it's not enough for just institutions or the organizations to take action. I think that also the government, public, the public institutions should be involved, because at least here in Spain, we're starting to hear conversations about the importance of making a survey, like a nationwide survey, to see racial profiles of people, of the citizens. So many are against it because they said that it would just fuel
mm,
racism and discrimination. But many are really vying for it, fighting for it, because as we know, many of the minorities, people of color,
mm,
racializados, are more susceptible to poverty and, you know, worse conditions, standards of living. So there's a debate that's getting louder, about this topic. So I think, yes, the government should also be involved in this conversation, actively involved in this conversation, because I think that if there's no backing from the government, the organizations would just, yeah, fall into the trap of tokenism. Oh, we've already done a couple of conferences on DNI. That's it.
Mm.
And we have hired an intern from, I don't know, Malaysia. Perfect. That's it.
Tick in the
So
box. Yeah.
exactly, a tick in a box. So that's like, like something quite higher and less tangible, at least from my point of view. But as an employee, I would really invite the decision makers of an organization to start having this conversation with the employees, because and with employees and the wider stakeholders. Because a sentence that I usually hear here in Spain is that, oh, of course I'm not racist. I don't see color. you know,
Mm.
I'm neither sexist nor feminist, ni machista ni feminista. So it's like you can't stay in the gray area forever. You have to face, the extremes, so you would know how to position and see where the balance is.
Yeah.
And as a professional in communications sector, I really think that we have a big responsibility on the use of terms and on how we choose the visual aids when we post, when we communicate anything, to take care that people of color are represented in a more, yeah, modern way, like, just not always feeding the same narrative. Don is, I
I'm
think he can
laughing.
relate.
I'm laughing because there's always this someone who's coming to, like, someone who is what do you call that, a hungry child, and then there is always someone who is a light skin always helping
Oh my
the child,
god.
right? So they always have this narrative of, like, you put an African child and then you put someone white helping the African child, as if like savior is always someone who is white and someone who is
Yes.
struggling is always the dark skin. I have a very good example when I was in one company before, my previous company. So we had this very good presentation. We were talking about coffee. So there was producers and there was consumer. So I put a black African lady drinking a coffee, and she's drinking the coffee, and then she's the consumer, and the producers were they were, I think, from Sri Lanka or something, but this was really from the producers. Then one of the manager, he came to me and said, hey Don, can we change the picture of the consumer, because I'm getting confused who is the producer, who is the consumer. And for me that was like, why are you confused? Like, because she is an African lady drinking coffee and she is like well dressed. And then he's like, maybe we want to make it more explicit. And then, what do you mean? I asked him, do you want me to change it to a white person so it can fit your narrative? So
Ouch.
like, yeah. So then he said, okay, never mind. But then when you speak about it, then he said, okay, let's keep it. But he said, for me, it was just a bit confusing my brain. But at least he acknowledged the fact that he got confused. It's a bit of name. For me, it was quite shocking that he literally come and asked me to change the picture because it was confusing to see an African person who can be a consumer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I know something. I'm sorry, Mahmoud, something just came into my mind, and it has to do with white fragility.
Yeah.
So when I was talking about the importance of opening up this conversation with the decision makers in a company, you would always, at least, there would be one white male, middle-aged, or boomer
Mm.
generation of people who would have that fragility in them and would be so defensive. So I guess it's exhausting, but it's I don't want to say it is what it is, but it is how some things are in certain spaces. So I think it's there's the more reason to to have this conversation and to put this topic on the table.
Yeah. I think like you touched on a couple of things that I think are very important. Like I think like the first thing that you mentioned as like one of the things that resonated a lot was the importance of true representation, right? Like not representation that perpetuates a certain stereotype or a certain stigma associated to a group in that sense. And I think also like one of the things that came up in the conversation that I also want to highlight is that I think us as humans, we have a tendency to group people very quickly, and I think we also do that when we're talking to people about such topics, right? Like some people would jump into calling somebody a racist just because of a certain experience, right? But I personally believe that a lot of these experiences stem from maybe ignorance, not knowing about something, or maybe again because privilege a lot of the times blinds you from other experiences, other realities in that sense. And I feel like there is obviously like puts a lot of importance in such conversations and sharing aware and like spreading awareness and helping people see things. But I also want to recognize the impact that the continuity of these experiences, how it impacts people of minority groups, which can lead to sense feelings of frustrations as well and stuff like that, because like why can't you see this in that sense, right? But I still like, despite that, I still believe, and I think I've had also my fair share of like such experiences as well, being from an Arab Muslim living in Europe, and also I'm a refugee, which adds another layer of complexities to things. But I think like it's important to kind of like remember that I think because a lot of these, I'm not saying all of these actions, a lot of these actions really do not come from a negative place. If we approach them with a negative or with a strong force against it, I think people would be
Yeah.
afraid to interact. And I think what we need is more contact and not less contact. So I think like even though it's difficult for like I keep reminding myself of the importance of being empathetic, being gentle, like try to understand as well understand where that person is coming from, and to
Yeah.
defend more ideas of equality and equity instead of certain groupings, right? Because I think we hide a lot behind identities and we forget that the core of what we want to share. And I think when we go back to ideas and the ideas we want to defend, we might find more middle grounds where everybody can thrive in that sense
Yeah.
and learn from each other.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry,
No,
Carissa.
no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Uh, I agree, Mahmood. I think one of the things which we are also talking about psychological safety, right? So, for people of color or minorities to have that create the space, the majority needs to be in that space as well. So, if the majority needs to be in the space, minorities also it's also our responsibility to a bit create that psychological safety.
Yeah.
So many of these actions are coming from ignorance, and they are not doing it on purpose. Sometimes it's just that it's so natural and just happen. And then we talk a lot about psychological safety. How do we create the psychological safety in all these spaces so you can have that meaningful conversations? Sometimes I mean I also have this experience. When I was in India, I never thought about white spaces, and when I moved to Amsterdam, the white spaces was not scary for me because it was foreign, but it was never scary for me. But when it started to have like so much of this microaggressions and all these things are building up on me, now I when I walk into white space, I'm very conscious, I'm very alert. So I can even sense my anxiety building up even to walk into this. So what is the impact is that I am very defensive then. So a small thing can happen, I'm like, oh, it's racist, but maybe the person is not racist, just a horrible person, right? But I immediately
Can be of
classify.
any color.
Yeah,
It
it
can
can
come
be
from
any color, any
anywhere.
color. Yeah, it's not a
Indeed.
racism. It's just the person is rude and arrogant. But I
Yeah.
immediately say, "Oh, this happened because I'm a person of color." But one of my friends, but I don't think so. It's just a rude person. Then you look at it, that person is behaving exactly to everyone. But then immediately my brain is racism. I think as people of colors, we also need to be open to the fact that it's not always racism. It can happen. So how do we create the psychological safety? Is only be having conversations. So need to have conversation. Hey, I felt this way when you said that. Then the other person will realize, oh, I did not mean that way, but it impacted you that way. But then you can have that meaningful conversation. And I think psychological safety, I think, is very important in DNI. Sometimes I do feel like we are very defensive. So people are scared even to come into the space and talk about it. I
Oh
think,
my
yeah.
god.
Yeah.
I think that that's part of the white fragility. Like not knowing how to, because I sense that, oh my god, I don't know how to frame this, but I sense that, Eurocentric culture, it's like we know everything. We have the answers to everything. And so they don't know how to navigate this space of uncertainty. It's something relatively new, depending on which, geography you operate. And I think it's just that they're uncomfortable navigating not knowing. And so instead of just saying, "Oh my God," the same with the pronouns. How do I call you? How do I navigate this? And I would just tell them, ask. Like, expose yourself to not knowing, because then you're giving the other person enough space to share what they need to share with you, so you can have a more fluid conversation or relationship. And I can totally relate to what you say, Don, about that anxiety building up, because it has built up over time. Even if you come here with this, the slate clean, no bias, and you feel confident with what you know, with your capacity to express yourself and to adapt to circumstances, it just builds up on you, and it turns into that heavy thing. And so I wanted to, with this in mind, I wanted to go back to what Mahmoud said, that we need more contact and more conversation. But then, where do you strike the balance between, yes, meeting someone in the middle, but not turning into the teacher or the educator, because that is also a factor of burnout and anxiety. I don't know what your experience is on this part.
So I agree with you on like what I think is that, so I think on a group level, I do believe that minority groups have a responsibility to share their story, because otherwise
Mhm.
the story would be said for them. I do also believe
Exactly.
that it's not a responsibility that every single member of the minority group has to carry, right? I think this is how we get resources online, how how these conversations happen, how, like, I think individuals from minority groups took it upon themselves to spark these learning spaces. I think what we can do is, if a person finds a burden and they really can't handle it, I think there are two parts. Like, first of all, not to expect any person from a minority to be the educator, but there are a lot of resources now everywhere that we can use. I think the other part is that the person of the minority can maybe just reference these resources if they know them, or just tell the person to look like somewhere else, that they don't want to carry that burden, in that sense. Because there are other people, right, like that would be willing and happy to do the process of learning, and maybe are even more experienced, because the learning experience is not like the teaching experience is not for everyone. And as we all
And you have trainers like Mahmoud now to train people now, so we can hire Mahmoud.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That would make way for more conversations
Yeah.
and more contact, better
Yeah.
than Googling.
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, it has been such a very interesting conversation with both of you. I've learned so much. I thank you so much for being so open and sharing, like, also from you, like, not just like from your professional experiences, but also from your personal experiences. I just want to leave you, if you have any last words before we end the episode, anything else that we'd like to share.
Uh, Karissa, this time I'm gonna let you go first.
um, I think my final message would be to invite people to just navigate the uncertainties, because this this space they were opening up, this topics of conversation. I mean, I've never heard my parents, let alone my grandparents, talk about these topics in any type of gathering, formal, informal, familiar, more relaxed gatherings. No, I've never heard them talk about these. they would speak of these topics maybe in coded terms so the children won't hear it. But this is the first time I'm really hearing and participating, and yeah, just being a witness to how the topic evolves. So I would just invite people to not be afraid to navigate in the uncertainty and not knowing, and don't be afraid to ask. Like, people would know if your intentions are harmful or not, or if you're just really curious and you want to know to be able to deliver better. I think, yeah, I think that's it. And thank you for the invitation.
What about you, Don?
I think my final thoughts would be, I think all of us struggle with something, right? So I think have that empathy, and be open to everyone. Minorities being open to majority people who are, and then being open and have that empathy, so that you can have the meaningful conversations. When you start to talk, then you listen, and then you understand what is it coming from, why is it happening. I think having that space create a psychological safety. I think that's my parting word, and I really hope that in 10 years down the road we do not talk about DNI, and I will not have my job because it's not a topic anymore, right? It will be embedded in the society. That's my wish. But yeah, so that is my hope as well. We will not need to have this conversation because everything is equitable. It won't be a topic, for the future generation at least. But I think to happen that we need to have this conversation now, so you don't need to talk about it in future.
Mahmoud, let's schedule another meeting 10 years from now, like on
10
the
years from
13th of September
now.
2034, and let's see how things are.
But when you really think about it, that there was a conversation about females wearing jeans so many years back. So, we don't talk about it anymore because it's so ingrained. Nobody thinks it is that is a topic anymore. I mean, maybe certain parts of the world it's still a topic, but that's what I'm like. Yes, DNI will not be a topic because it would be solved. We don't see people different, and we don't have to talk about it because it's equitable. I don't know whether it's going to happen in 10 years, but that's my hope.
Cross fingers.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you again, both of you, for again such an amazing conversation, for sharing your insights and everything. For you listeners, you've been listening to Working with Identities. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you extract many, many learnings as I did from this very engaging conversation. We will see you in future episodes.